Hey nerds, welcome back. I'm Tyler. Today I'm going to be unboxing and setting up this 130 watt CO2 laser machine from Monport. Now I'm going to be going through a full setup, so everything you could imagine I'm going to be going through on this machine. And if you have a machine like this but maybe not the same brand, they're all set up very close to the same and they all have very similar parts, so you'll likely benefit from watching this video as well. For those of you that are my subscribers and aren't so interested in devices like this, hang out. I promise you I've got a lot of budget builds, furniture, and home improvement projects in the works. I've just had this sitting around here for a while. I need to get it set up so I can try it out. We've reached a really weird place in society now where expensive technology is starting to become more affordable for consumers like us. So I'm really trying to branch out into some of these technologies and see how they may benefit us for our businesses and making some money. Some of those technologies are CO2 lasers like this, 3D printers, and CNC machines. And I know we're seeing a lot of this all over the internet. And I myself am intrigued. I want to see if I can make some money with some of these. So if you're like me and you're interested in using technology to make project work a lot easier and scale up a business to make more money, subscribe, follow along, leave a comment in the comments below, letting me know what technology you're interested in and maybe even brands. And I'll try and reach out to those brands if I get enough interest to see if I can get a sample of one of their tools to try out for us and see if it's worth the time and money. All right, you guys, let's get into it. Okay, now that we're all unboxed, there's a couple things we want to do. First, we want to check down here on this little panel and make sure that it has the correct voltage setup for the country that you're in. I'm in the United States, so 110 is what we're looking at. And, oh, I noticed something wrong here. One sec. That's not a big deal, but it looks like they didn't write this in freedom units. So this should actually be 51 by 35 inches. Next, we're going to want to check the tube, make sure that the laser tube didn't get damaged during shipping. And you open up these little latches by pulling up and then rotating. Pop the back open here. Ooh, that's a big boy. So this is the 130 watt model, and it says here as well 130 watts on the laser, so everything matches up. So you're going to want to inspect the tube for any cracks or damage. I have seen some pictures of these broken in shipping. It can happen. It travels a long way in that big crate, so you never know how it's treated during the shipping process. But basically, this is how the laser is going to shoot through. This should also, I think, be filled up with water when we fill it with fluid. This model has the built-in chiller, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, but that chiller will pump water up through here into this hose and then up into the tube to keep the laser cool while it performs. And the laser comes out here, and then this should be a mirror. Yep. So this is the little mirror setup along with some adjustments, I believe. So everything looks good in here. I would recommend that you go around, before you plug this in or anything, go around and touch stuff. Make sure nothing's loose and nothing came loose during shipping. Again, it's traveled a long distance. You never know what may happen. Or even from the factory, maybe somebody was hungover and didn't screw something down, but this all seems to be really tight and tidy. I check all of these little screws. This is for part of the gantry movement, and it seems to all be in place and sturdy. There was a little rough edge here, right? I shouldn't say rough, but a potential for damage to this hose. So I added a little bit of weather stripping back here. I might replace this with like a grommet, but basically the sheet metal has a hole cut, and these tubes were fed in there, or the hoses were fed in there. And I think there's a potential for that to wear down over time. So I added a little weather stripping to protect it. Let's open up the back here. This is the exhaust. Come on, baby, you're tight. There we go. Now, I already took the liberty of fixing something in here. These guys, which are your exhaust duct work, was hanging down and touching. There's a chain in here. Let me show you. So I hope you can see this, but here is a chain. I believe this is to help, raise and lower the laser bed. And anyway, this ductwork was kind of sitting on this. I think, not really a big strike against them, but I think what happened was they just had too much slack in these. So you could fix this two ways. You could probably trim this and have shorter hoses coming out. But what I ended up doing is just using some bungee cord and magnets to hold these up out of the way, and they're very strong magnets. I'll show you them in a little bit. I bought a whole package of them to use for holding material down on the laser bed. So that's this. Make sure that your chain is fairly tight. This chain is nice and tight. While this is open, and while you have any of these compartments open, double check your electric connections. For me, the plug here to the chiller was undone. And I also tested this plug out to make sure that it was seated appropriately, and this one was. But make sure that there's connections all over the place. Some of them are grounds, some of them, like for the fans that are down here, I'd go around and just tug on these things, make sure that they're plugged in and seated correctly. Also in this back compartment here is your air assist pump, which seems to be one of those aquarium style pumps. But anyway, here's the hose coming off of that, and I believe it runs up this way, up into the laser tube section and back up against the gantry up top. Okay, so that all looks good. And let me put these babies back in here. We're still looking at the back here, on over to this side panel. This is gonna house a bunch of your electronics. Let's open this up. Again, lift and swivel for the latch there. And then on this inside, there's little buttons that you press. I'll show you them here, but these are the mechanism to open these up. Over here, we have all of our electric components. Here is our main board, our motherboard. Here are drivers for the gantry. I think these are independent. I think one of these are X and one of these are Y. So up and down and left and right. And I believe this is a driver also, but for the bed raising and lowering. I could be wrong, but that's an assumption. This is a power supply, a low voltage power supply. Take notice on this one that you have a switch, so you can select 110 or 220 volt. Obviously for here in the States, it's 110. Mine was in the right orientation, and the same with this one. I believe this is also a power supply, and the switch was to set to 110. This guy right here, this is your main power supply. This is for the Mac Daddy CO2 laser. Now, if you have one of the smaller CO2 models like the K40 or something like that, yours I think will be blue. It'll look different than this one, but most of the bigger cabinet lasers like this one have a similar power supply that look like this. So feel free to correct me if you know better, but I believe I have these right. While we're on this side, let's open up this little access panel here. You'll find these access panels all over the machine. They're intended to be able to get to different components a lot easier than through the front or through, one of the other openings. On this side, we have our gantry, the stepper motor, and some of like the belts. In here, we've got a proximity sensor, that little red guy, proximity sensor or switch. And there's another one here on this gantry. So these basically tell the system when the gantry is moving back and forth and all over the place, when this is getting close to the end of its reach. So if you have an issue with something like that, your switch may be out or unplugged, just something to keep in mind. Also on this side, we've got our different USB to PC, flash drive, and network connections. Over on this other side, there's not really anything exciting. It's mainly an empty cabinet. There is a spot to access. Let me show you. Over on this side, this is I have the water chiller, so the onboard water chiller is right here, and here are the hoses for that. Again, I had a unprotected corner, an unprotected sheet metal opening here, and these hoses seem to rub on it a little bit, so I just added again some sort of weather stripping, some foam there to help protect those. Now on the same side, we've got a little side access panel. Here we have another mirror so we can make our adjustments. Make sure you shake things, pull on them, move things around, make sure nothing got loose during shipping. Everything in my situation here looks good. Check the belt tension. The belt tension in mine feels fairly firm. Probably like a guitar string is really what you're looking for. And I don't see anything that seems out of place. Ow! I don't see anything that's out of place or seems loose at all here. So this looks good. Let's close it up. Oh, and if these are a little tight for you, you can open them up and then bend them out a little bit, and that should make it a little bit easier to open and close. On top here, we have basically the ignition switch. You've got your main controller and you have your emergency stop. When you go to use the laser, make sure that this is turned and up rather than depressed. Otherwise, it will not turn on and you'll be wondering why. So this is a good thing to keep in mind when troubleshooting issues. Someone may have pressed this or you may have pressed it on accident. Another thing to familiarize yourself with is this list of helpful cautions. So things to read and understand about the laser and its operation. On the top, you have plexiglass. From what I understand, plexiglass stops the radiation from lasers like this from escaping. For example, if you were to put a sheet of plexiglass in here and try and use the laser to cut through it, it wouldn't cut through. I still think that wearing some sort of eye protection is probably a smart move, just in case there's some light leaks somewhere or something like that. I don't know. You do you. I just like my eyes a lot. Let's open this baby up. And this is just paper, or tape. I'll be able to remove that. And here you have your laser bed. You've got a honeycomb, and underneath the honeycomb should be a knife bed, I believe. Yeah, knife bed. I'm gonna have to remove this and take all the plastic off, so we'll do that in a second. Over here is your laser head, all nicely bowed up with your keys. I'll take all that stuff off. And the big front access panel here drops down. You can get access to your bed leveling system, and there's a tray down here, a catch tray for all of the poop that falls down as you're cutting things out. So any of your stuff is funneled down into this tray, you slide it out and throw all of the leftovers. Oh yeah, and I nearly forgot to mention, this has a pass-through slot. So if you want to engrave or cut really long material with the lid down, you will be able to fit it in and slide it through like this. So a big piece of plywood or MDF or something like that. Or, really long board, I don't know, what have you. The next move before we power it on is going to be adding distilled water to the water system. From what I understand and what the manual suggests is distilled water only because antifreeze can degrade your system over time. So I got specifically distilled water without any impurities, no electrolytes or minerals, things like that. You'll see it'll say like electrolytes added for taste or minerals added for taste. You don't want that. I'll show you the one that I got so that you get a good one also, but we'll add that that to the system, and then we'll do a little bit of fine tuning and some testing, I think. But yeah, let's get to it. Okay, time to add water. You know, hydration is really important. Where were we? Oh yeah, time to add water. This is the water that I use. It's distilled water from Pure Life. I got mine at like Walgreens. I don't know, maybe you have something similar near you that you can pick this up at. I couldn't find it at Walmart, so don't go there. But it says here specifically for use in small appliances that require the use of distilled water. So they are taking into account basically what we need here. Something without electrolytes, something without minerals. Taste doesn't matter. We want it to be as pure as possible. So that's the one that I use. Okay, so here we are at the water system. A couple of things about this that I noticed. First off, you've got a drain here, and I opened this and spilled some water on the floor. So know that your system, when they tested it, there's still probably a little residual water left in there. There's a little gauge here to anticipate how full the system is. I assume after we fill this up and we run the system and it primes, the water level is going to go down, and then so we'll have to fill it up a little bit. I'll probably put it somewhere up here above normal, closer to the full, definitely not all the way to the top. Now it does say in the manual that if you have to operate this system in an environment where water would freeze, you should not use regular antifreeze, but you can use glycol and distilled water at a 60-40 mixture. And it says that distilled water is the best. That mixture with the glycol still has the potential to degrade the system over time. So it's less safe than just pure water. So just letting you know, that's what the manual says. If you have to operate this in a freezing environment, which some of us do. And just to be clear, before you turn it on, from what I understand, you want to remove all of this stuff. And it seems like it easily slides through the little pass-through, which I dropped down there. Okay, so I'm in a little bit of disarray here. This is going to be the first time that I turn this on. I haven't even plugged it in yet, so I'm just as new at this as you are. Wish me luck. I don't know what to expect. So I'm going to plug these two in. Oh! Whoa! Okay, our sensor back here is reading. Whoa, we're in business. All right, let me check the back. Yeah, I don't actually even see any water flowing through the tube, and it should be. Maybe this does it. All right, I'm just gonna close this just in case something weird happens. Oh, I hear water. Water's flowing. Let me get you. Let me show you. See, there's a little bubble trap there, so that is filled with water right now. Sorry, you guys, I totally missed this, but basically, water just filled up this tube. And there was bubbles everywhere, and now it's filled with water. So you kind of know what to expect. You got to turn the key, and the key starts this whole situation. Now that we've done a function test of the machine, we know that it seems to work as it's supposed to. We know that the laser tube seems to be fine. We haven't fired up the laser yet, but all of the mechanical functions seem to be in order. The next thing I'm going to do that's going to improve the functionality of the machine is test square between this gantry or rail and this gantry or rail, however you want to call it. I've found in previous lasers that I've owned that the gantries aren't square, and the problem with that is if you go to cut out or engrave a square or even a circle or something, it'll be off. So instead of a square, you'll get another geometric shape like a trapezoid or something like that. And for a circle, it might end up being more of an oval than a perfect circle. So that may not be a problem for you, but it's easy to dial this in. So let me show you how to do that. My machine was actually in really good shape, very close, but for this demonstration, I've unhooked a couple of things and I'll show you what I did, and moved this extra out of square just to demonstrate and show you what you may encounter. So what I'm gonna do, how I'm gonna test this is I have a square guide here, and I'm going to hold it up against both of these rails or the gantries and check to see if they are in square with each other. So let me get you close and we can take a look. I'm using a little clamp here to hold this. It's hard to demonstrate this with only one hand while I hold the camera. But I've got a little clamp here holding the square guide up against this rail. And as you can see, when it butts up against here, we've got a gap. So that means that this rail is off, angled this way, right? So this is not what you want to see. You want to see it tight, and see if I could get it. You want to see it without a gap, something like this. So let's go ahead and get into the back and I'll show you what you need to do to make that happen. All right, so we're in the back of the machine now. Here's where the laser tube is. Behind that are the rods, and these are couplers. There's a motor here, and this motor drives the gantry movement up and down like that. So what you're gonna wanna do, these couplers hold these different segments of this drive shaft or rod here. If you loosen one of these screws here, it releases the grip on basically the gear system and the belts so that it can spin freely without affecting the movement of the gantry. So if you loosen just one, you don't have to loosen all the screws, just one here, and then loosen one over here on this side, and this should spin freely without affecting. See, as you can see, it's spinning here, but the belt isn't moving, and that means that the gantry is not moving either. The way this benefits what we're trying to do here is with these two disconnected, the gantry on either side can move independent from each other, and that way if it's cocked off like this, we can move it and straighten it out. So let's do that. The tools that you're going to need to complete this, or at least the tools that I use to do something like this, are a square of some sort, and I use clamps. That way I can hold them both in place so I can go to the back and tighten those couplers back up. Right now, as we know, we're sitting out of square, so I'm gonna take my other clamp here. I'm gonna have to go from underneath, tighten it up, and now it's meeting. Let me show you. Here's a little view in case it was hard to see what was going on. Here's my 90-degree guide, and here's a clamp reached up around the back, holding it against this rail back here. And then here's another clamp holding the 90-degree guide up against this rail. So as you can see, there's now no gap right here. And then we're going to do the other side. And here we go, same setup, right? Clamped up against this side rail here, and then clamped up against this rail. And we can see no gap. Okay, now let's go to the back and tighten up those couplers. Okay, so this is the one that I loosened up. It really doesn't matter. This is basically a, pinching connecting system. One clamps to this side, one clamps to this side, so you can do whichever one you want. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just tightening this up to German specifications, which is guten tight. That one's good. Let's do the other one. Be very careful of your laser tube and your metal tools. Cool. Now let's go double check that it stayed square. All right, and with the clamps now removed, we're going to test to make sure with the square guide up against both of these rails, and this is nice and tight. This one also nice and tight, no gaps. So, success. All right, we're getting really close to being able to take this baby for a ride. The last thing that I'm gonna do before that though is I'm putting this in a spot that's advantageous for me to use. This location in the garage is close to some outlets, so I can plug this in, and it's orientated so that I can exhaust out through the garage door if I have it cracked a little bit. So you also are probably going to want to put it in a spot where it's going to remain stationary, that you don't have to move it around a lot. Not only is it a big machine, but the next step that you're going to want to take is making sure that the Y gantry rails, the one on the right side and the one on the left side here, that they are in the same plane. So they don't actually have to be level. The machine doesn't have to be level, but if it's unlevel, they have to be unlevel the same amount, if that makes sense. So I learned this from Bill at Countryside Custom Laser Engraving. He's part of a laser group that I'm in, and he shares a lot of insight. He's like the expert in the group. But it makes total sense if you have in a garage floor, oftentimes it'll be like this. If you have some sort of twist or warp in your machine because of an unlevel floor, especially around like the relief cracks that are in the concrete, it can throw everything off. So just like we squared up the gantries to each other, this is another step in making sure that you have accuracy. So make sure you do that. The way that you're gonna want to is take a level and run it up here on the sides. So on the right side, check the bubble, and then over on the left side and check the bubble. And again, they don't have to be perfectly level. The bubble doesn't have to be in between those two lines, but you want the bubbles to mirror each other. If they don't, you're gonna use your leveling feet and crank it out until they do. The next step I'm gonna complete as part of the setup is to align the mirrors. Before we do that, at least in my case, I'm gonna clean them with 99% isopropyl alcohol and some Q-tips. Now, this may not be necessary, but a lot of these machines are gonna be ran and tested before they're shipped out. So the back and side mirrors likely won't be too dirty, but the mirror attached to the laser head that directs the beam into the lens, that one will probably have some stuff on it. So just to make sure I'm doing my due diligence and making sure that there's nothing that's gonna skew the results as I dial this in, I think that's gonna give you your best shot. So that's what we're gonna do now. Let's get to it. So right here's the hole and the mirror. All you're gonna do is dip your Q-tip in your isopropyl alcohol and go in here and swab this around. Mine was actually pretty clean. There was a little bit of stuff on it, so it doesn't hurt to make sure that this step's taken care of before you dial everything in. Here's the laser head and we follow the gantry over. Here's the other mirror. Again, the exact same situation. Dip in isopropyl alcohol and clean that up, and you'll be able to see the mirror right there. See how it's shining? And the mirror here in the back is the very first mirror that the laser beam touches, and it comes out of the laser head, and then here's your mirror casing or housing. And again, just in here, give it a nice cleaning. Okay, I think we're good here. Let's go ahead and dial these mirrors in. As we set this up, I have two recommendations for you. First off, I pre-cut out a bunch of strips of tape. These are double, so I put one layer of tape down and then another layer, and then I cut them out so I have a bunch of squares. This is just gonna make the process much easier and faster for you than ripping pieces of tape off and then trying to do it that way. Just have them already pre-prepared. The second thing is I would suggest some sort of eye protection. I'll link these in the description below. They're a decent pair of laser glasses, but you want to make sure that they are rated for the wavelength that your laser is. There we go. Maybe you can read that, but it's got 10,600 nanometers. That's the wavelength for most CO2 lasers. If we look at the laser tube, there is a wavelength identifier here, 10,600 nanometers. So we know now that our glasses match this wavelength, and this is the only way to be sure that those are going to protect you. So our first move is going to be to turn the water system on, give it a couple seconds to circulate, and then turn the laser on. We're going to be getting our screen coming up here. Let's set our max power. So we don't need a ton of power to make a mark and cut through those tape strips as we dial this in. All we have to do is select max power. You can guide through the little levels here with these arrows. how high or low you want your power to be. Right now it's 35, 25, 15, 14, 13, 12, right? I'm gonna leave it at about 15. That seems to be the sweet spot, and then hit enter. Then what we're gonna do after we put the tape in place, we'll hit the pulse button, and that will send a laser pulse through the laser and all the system. So let's set up our tape. This is actually really easy. All we're gonna do is we're gonna take one of our pre-cut out pieces of tape, set it here across the mirror opening, and then press really hard inside that opening, and this is gonna create a little outline. That outline now helps you dictate where the center is gonna be. We wanna make sure that as the laser leaves the tube and hits this housing, that it's gonna hit the mirror straight in the center. So this is gonna help us identify that. All right, so it's all set up. I'm gonna hit the pulse button here. Yep, and a little bit of smoke. For initial results, I don't think it can get much better than that. That seems to me to be pretty dead center. And I think it goes without saying, but just to be clear here, make sure and remove this. To start, let's take the gantry and move it all the way back. To do that, all we have to do with everything turned on is use the arrows. The arrows will help position everything. See that? Let's look over here. And I'm just pressing up. So that's a little far back. It's just gonna be hard for me to reach, so I'm gonna bring it forward a little bit. Down arrow. That's pretty good. So now you can see that's where the mirror housing is. That's where the opening is as well, so we can play around in there. We're gonna take a piece of tape, apply it over the opening here, press down pretty good to make sure we get that opening is visible on the tape. You can see the hard outline of the opening. And what we're testing with this one, the first one was testing to make sure out of the laser tube that the height and everything, the position of that previous mirror was in place, basically just the housing. What we're testing with this test is to make sure that the alignment of that back mirror is correct. So as it leaves the laser tube, it bounces off that mirror. Is that mirror in a position to get us directly in the center of this housing? Let me power everything up and I will pulse the laser real quick. If you get a machine protected error when you go to pulse, it's because the top is open and it's trying to protect you basically. So I close the top. Now let's try and pulse here. There we go. This is pretty good, but as we can tell, it is a little high and a little right. Now that has nothing to do with this laser housing actually, and it has everything to do with the previous mirror setup. So when we tested the previous one, the laser came out of the tube and hit directly center in the housing, which is good. That means that the laser tube and the housing are set up at the appropriate height. This, though, being off indicates that the mirror angle on the previous mirror is a little tweaked. So we'll have to change that a little bit. Okay, so we're looking at the first mirror, and if we recall, the next housing were off, up, and to the right. So we have three different adjustment knobs here. This one is for up and down adjustment. This one is for left and right adjustment. And this is for diagonal adjustment. We can try and cheat and just go with the diagonal adjustment because it is up and right, but I think it might be easier for us to dial this in small increments, left a little bit and then down a little bit. So let's try that. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is to loosen up these locking screws, and then in small amounts change these like dialing screws. So let's try that out. Okay, so it was actually counterintuitive. Loosening the screw here does not make the beam travel left. Loosening it makes the beam travel right. So tightening this screw makes the beam travel left, and doing so I've been able to get it centered on the x-axis. So let's take a look. So now it's centered left and right on the x-axis. On the y-axis up and down, I still need the beam to travel down a little bit here. So let's take a look at that screw, and that's this guy right here. and that one is loosening it makes the beam travel down. So lefty loosey brings the beam down, righty tighty brings the beam up. And after a few goes at it here, this last one right here seems to be centered. I'm gonna remove this tape, put a new one on, and just make sure that this mess here isn't skewing my eye. And just like I thought, that looks pretty good. A nice way to be able to see this is also from the back. And there you go, it doesn't get much better than that. With the back mirror aligned with the gantry close to that mirror, let's move the gantry far away and double check to make sure at a far distance it's also aligned. If it's unaligned, this is definitely going to be much more micro adjustments, because the distance from that back mirror to this mirror housing when it's all the way up here in the front is going to cause much more movement of that laser beam. So let's move it up. Yep, as far forward as we can. Here we are with the same piece of tape still on, that way we can tell if the dot is any different, but I'm gonna go ahead and pulse it right now. And good thing we're checking, so it looks like it's actually centered very well left to right or on the x-axis, but it did drop down a little bit on the y. So now I'm gonna make a little micro adjustment, maybe, I don't know, 1/8 of a turn, something like that, and then see if we could bring it up. And there we are. That's just about as perfect as I can get it. I think the camera, looking through the viewfinder, makes it look like it's off a little bit. Actually, here you go. Here's a pretty good perspective. But yeah, like I said, basically dead center. Okay, so you would think that the next step naturally would be to ensure that this side mirror is set up so that it enters the laser head directly in the center of the mirror housing. That would make sense, but we want to make sure of two things before we do that, and there's potential that we may have to adjust the laser head, so that would throw off any of those adjustments that we make over here anyways. So the next two things that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the laser bed is level, and I'll show you how to do that even if mine is level. And the next piece after we know that it's all level is we're going to make sure that the laser head is perpendicular to the laser bed. Then after we know that, we'll dial in this last side mirror and this guy here, the mirror on the laser head, to make sure that it's shooting out through the lens, through the hole perfectly. So let's go ahead. I'm going to install the honeycomb bed, and I'll show you how we're going to test and then how to adjust it. All right, we've got our honeycomb in place. Let's jump over to the controller and let me show you how to raise and lower the bed. To raise and lower your bed, if it's set up to be controlled digitally and not manually, you hit this ZU button in the center of your arrows, and that'll bring up your menu screen here. Then it's on Z move, which your Z axis is your up and down. So you hit enter, and then you press left or right to raise or lower the bed. See, left, for me, raises, right, lowers. So let's jump down, look at the laser head, and set this up. Okay, so I'm gonna bring the laser head, yeah, right here up in the front right corner, and then I'm going to adjust my bed heights. Yeah, so we're basically touching. There's like almost no room there. So what we're doing is we're judging how far the distance is from the bottom of the nozzle here to the laser bed. And what we're setting is basically a standard in this front right corner. So now let's move the laser head all the way over to the left. Now we'll take our measuring block and try and slide it under the head, and we cannot move that underneath there. So we know at this point that the bed is higher on this side than it does on the right. So now let's make an adjustment to fix this. With the system turned off, let's open up our access panel and let's take a look down here. So under here we have our 4 screws, leveling screws, that are hooked up to a chain, and the chain goes all the way to the back there to a motor that we looked at earlier. And we can independently change the height of the bed by moving these screws by themselves. The way to do that is there's a set screw back here that keeps tension on this gear, But if we loosen the set screw, the gear will not be tied to the movement of this screw. That will allow us to move the screw, and in doing so, raise or lower the bed each corner by itself without having this chain move. So let's go ahead and loosen this set screw, and then we're going to move the leveling screw to raise and lower the bed until it meets our height requirement. Okay. It is loose now. Yep. Okay, let me show you the so now we know that this side matches the other side. We can now tighten the set screw down. There we go. Now I'm gonna do that same thing for the rest of the corners. But I probably won't film it just because I'm gonna have to go through a bunch of gloves and I don't wanna get this grease all over my camera. So I'm gonna do that and then I'll report back to you how good or bad everything was. So I had to crawl underneath the machine to get this to happen, but our bed is about the same height in all four corners. Didn't take too long, maybe about 15 minutes or so, but you can even hear the amount of air that's being let out. And then up in here, see that? And then back right corner. There we go, bed is level. The next move we're gonna make is to make sure that the laser head is perpendicular to the laser bed. I can't guarantee that this is gonna be the case, but I can do my best to make it happen. So you may have to lower the laser bed a little bit and place something underneath there. There's a little collar here that you can undo. And then you should be able to remove your whole laser head assembly and you can move it out of the way. I'm gonna also remove this collar. So with all of this stuff out of the way, we can use squares and test to make sure that different pieces of this assembly are perpendicular to the bed. So what I'm gonna use for reference, I've got the laser bed down here, and then I have the flat sides of the housing here. So as you can see, there's a slight gap towards the top, which means I should be able to rotate the assembly this way a little bit and fix that. And it's actually a very easy adjustment. I just have these two bolts here, boom and boom. So let's loosen those and fix that. Yeah, dude, that looks good. Let's tighten it up. And there we go. As you can see, no gap. Perfect. And the other side, just to confirm. Sweet. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, what about the other axis of square? And it seems to be set up well that way. And if it wasn't, I'm not even sure what I would do to fix that. Maybe bend this, but I don't know. Mine seems to be set up well though. Since we're here, let's take the laser head apart and clean the lens. From what I've seen, this seems to be the easiest way to take the lens out. So you have to depress this little blue thing here that holds your air assist in. You can pull this to the side, and then this you should be able to rotate this. And the best way is to undo the little brass fitting that holds your air assist elbow in. So I'm gonna bring this back a little bit. And here's your nozzle with your housing and your lens. behind this retention piece here, there should be a nylon, yep, a nylon washer, and then your lens. And so you can just drop this out. Mine's very clean, but if yours is dirty, and this is how you're gonna clean it, you can drop that out, and then I would use just a Q-tip and again, isopropyl alcohol. Neat little tip for you, if you need some space, these panels have a little springed hinge so you can remove the entire panel. That way you're not leaning up against them. Here we go. Now that we know that we're not going to really be messing with this anymore, we can set up the alignment from this mirror to the laser head. So I'm going to add a piece of tape. Oh, that's pretty close. Yeah, let's make a small adjustment. And again, the adjustments are going to be on this side mirror going towards the laser head. And that looks pretty good from where I'm sitting. So it looks pretty dead center. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to move the laser head around and try to take shots at it from different points and make sure that it's in the center in all kinds of different spots, and then make minor adjustments. And there we go, dude, all dialed in. The next step is to make sure that the mirror on the laser head is coming out of the nozzle in the center. Let's get to that. With all the other mirrors dialed in, there's only one last one to consider, and that is the mirror that directs the beam down into the lens and through the bottom nozzle here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna apply a piece of tape to the bottom. You might want to disconnect your air assist if you can't get the tape to stick, and that's just because the air is constantly pushing out of this nozzle and it might prevent this from sticking. So we'll undo that for now and stick your tape to the bottom of the nozzle and press hard so that you get an indentation of the edge of that nozzle. So let's take a look here. I actually ended up adding in directions as to what the orientation is. So I have F for front, so towards me, back of the cabinet, right, and then left. And this is gonna help me identify which adjustments I have to make. But as you can see, we have kind of a, I don't know what you would call that, like a moon shape, which I think means it's coming in contact with the edge of the bezel. I actually found an even better way to do it to save you some tape is label front, back, left, and right, and then do a grid. And after every step, make an adjustment. And then you can see exactly from your previous position where it moved to. So let me explain these results really quick. And some of the trouble that I had, I think that there was such misalignment that even on these small guys, I thought I was getting close to center, but really I was just getting part of the ring effect. What I ended up doing was putting a piece of wood down and tracking these, and initially it was a big ring. So maybe this is the first step that you start with. Put something down, get it within the focal distance, and then run it. So here is where I thought I had it dialed in, and then slowly I made changes until I got these little circles, and I moved this pattern here was all around the bed. So and then I tested it here on the tape as well. So now I know that I'm dialed in at the nozzle. Little tip for you, hopefully that helps. And to help you figure out what is and isn't in focus, your little keychain that you get with your laser should have a little acrylic block on there. And this acrylic block is basically the spacer used to determine the height for the perfect focus. So even the ones that I have here, those were very out of focus, but gave me a good point of measurement. Let me blast this with an in focus dot to show you what that pulse actually looks like. This is in focus. Very, very fine pulse there. This one, same in focus, but I really held the pulse down to see what would happen. So just a little bit thicker of a scorch mark there. But a cool little demonstration for you to maybe to learn from and help you align yours easier as well. And now what we can do is align our red dot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pulse the laser, and now where this dot is, without moving anything, I'm going to move where my red dot is set up. So I just loosened that, and so here's my red dot, right? It was way off. Here's the dot. I haven't moved anything, so here's the hole that we just burned. I can move that laser right to that spot there and then tighten it up, so I know it doesn't have to be perfect, but being close is going to help us as we, we're trying to like frame burns and all that. And there we go. The hole is, I don't know, 2 millimeter away from that. That's good enough for me. With everything else dialed in, the last thing that we need to focus on now is, well, the focus itself. The focus of the laser coming through the lens and hitting your workpiece. Now, I recognize that your machine probably came with something like this, a little nozzle spacer or some sort of focus gauge, something like that, that goes underneath the nozzle and make sure that the spacing between the edge of that nozzle and the workpiece remains the same. But we've changed so many things at this point, this might not still be accurate. And even so, not to discredit any of the manufacturers out there, but it wouldn't be the first time that I've received a machine that wasn't perfectly dialed in and the suggestion wasn't ideal or optimum for the situation that you actually receive. Plus, this is super easy and a cool way to demonstrate how a laser works and where it focuses at. And if you plan ever on changing your lens, which I suggest you take a look at, different focal lengths of lenses can give you different types of cuts and engravings. Some are better for engravings and give you really fine detail. Some are better for cuts and can cut much deeper material than the 2.5-inch lens that most of these lasers come with. So here's how we're gonna complete this. I've got a stack of some of these MDF pieces here just to create an angle. The laser, we're gonna start somewhere around here, and if you can tell by our stock setup guide, it is much below or closer to the workpiece than the guide wants. And then as we move the laser over towards the end of the cut, it'll have a much bigger gap where it should be, in theory, further away from the workpiece than is ideal. But we'll just give this a test and we'll see how close this setup block actually was to the real deal. And with everything in place, here, if I click frame, it'll show us the path the laser is going to take. Just like that. So let's run it real quick and then take a look at the results. Now that your line's been engraved, don't really move anything. You can move the laser head out of the way, that's what I did, but don't move any of this stuff. You're gonna use this for measuring. So what we're able to see, what we're able to observe with the outcome of this test is where the focus is on your laser. And we can see that as the line progresses down here, it starts. The laser is out of focus right here at the top. You can see the line is thick. As it progresses down the ramp, it becomes thin, and then as it goes even further, it becomes thick again. So what's happening is it starts out of focus, and this is in relationship to the surface of this material, keep that in mind. As it comes down the ramp here, it becomes in focus and then out of focus again. So what we're able to see is this section right here where the line is the thinnest, the laser is most in focus in relationship to the surface of this material. So if you're doing a lot of engraving, fine level engraving, this area right here is going to be where you want to sample the distance from your laser to the material. This way, all of your surface level engraving and even cutting of thin material has this is a nice reference point for that. However, if you plan on cutting thicker material, you may want to sample from over here. The distance from your laser to the surface of your material, you might actually want to sample here, because what you effectively do by choosing this side is you move the focal point from the surface of the material that you're cutting down below the surface a little bit more towards the center of the material. What that does is it allows you the most focused point of the beam to actually burn towards the center, and it really will make your cut more efficient and cleaner. I'll show you a little illustration here to describe what I'm talking about to you, but a lot of people out there, as they go and describe this ramp test and how to use the results, I don't think they're clearly stating that the center point here is in reference only to the surface of this material. And if you're using a big boy like this, you probably plan on doing a lot of cutting. you might want to sample more from this side over here somewhere. So I put together a 32-page presentation, and thankfully we're not going to go through all of that. I'm just going to hit a couple points here, but if you are interested in all of the stuff that I have to say in this presentation, I'll have it for free on my Patreon. So feel free to check that out. I'll have a link in the description. You can go look over there. But really what happens is the unfocused beam travels down into your laser head and through the lens, which has a special shape, right? As it goes through that lens, that special shape condenses the energy from the beam into a fine point, which is your focal point. And as the energy is condensed, this process is called convergence. If the beam was to naturally pass through your focal point uninterrupted and out the other side, it becomes more and more unfocused the further that it gets from the focal point, right? That process is called divergence. So convergence in towards the focal point, and the focal point is where your laser burns at its highest efficiency, and that's where it's the most focused, and that's where the thinnest line is. As it passes through that, again, it becomes wider and wider and more unfocused and more inefficient. So if you set your focus point to the very surface of the material that you're working on, it's great for engraving. The thinnest lines, it'll give you the most high definition engravings that you can, but as it travels deeper and deeper into the material, it becomes less and less focused and less optimized for cutting. If you move the focal point, right, the finest point with the highest intensity and the most energy down under the surface, it doesn't have to be in the center. I would actually recommend you do some sort of testing to confirm the efficiency, as that can be different depending on the material and the power of your laser. But if you move it down below the surface, you benefit because you get an acceptable focus range in the convergence section above the focal point, and you get the acceptable focus range that still cuts and still engraves and everything below the focal point in the divergence section. So instead of getting the high efficiency focal point on the very surface of the material, an acceptable, still burning, still cutting focal range after that, and then a completely unfocused section of the beam at the bottom, you get two acceptable focal ranges on the top and the bottom, with the most intense burning more towards the center. So definitely do some tests. A lot of the research I've found and some of my own tests confirm that this will give you an efficiency gain when it comes to cutting through thicker material, but your mileage may vary. Another benefit of setting it up this way is if you're looking at the surface level optimization, right? If the beam is powerful enough to cut all the way through, because of that hourglass shape, which is something you can't get away from, you have a big slant in your cut. If you're doing deep cut optimization with the focal point more towards the center, you end up with these two transitions, which are much less noticeable. This is much more noticeable, especially on thicker material. This looks almost like a rounded edge when you pull it off the laser bed. So another benefit to that, and again, I really suggest that you do your own testing and optimize based on your results. It may be better up a little bit further, the focal point. It may be better down a little bit further, depending on what you have going on. I'm going to use my machine mostly for cutting thicker material. And so I want, instead of the center point here, the focal point to be referenced to the surface, I want it to be buried a little bit beneath the surface to make my cutting a little bit easier. I've seen a lot of people online do one of these numbers where they're trying to get the measurement at an angle here. This isn't very accurate, and that's okay. Maybe it doesn't have to be. You can always get in the general area and then trial and error your way to perfection, right? That's fine. That's totally normal. That'll work for you. But to get me a little bit closer in the ballpark to start, I'm going to be using a compass, right? I just removed the pencil here, and I can get up underneath this area nice and easy, take the measurement that I'm looking for, tighten it in. So now I know that from the nozzle to my workpiece, I have that measurement saved. And then I could take my digital caliper and I can measure the distance between these two prongs this way. So that's I think a little bit more accurate of a way to get the measurement. And then after you do that, you can take that measurement, enter it into your system, and then make a little cutout. So for me, the best distance was 14.3 millimeters. So I made a couple of these little setup blocks. This is just for show. These aren't actual results here. This is just to help me explain. But realistically, up here somewhere, right here is a lot more of the distance. This is 14.3 millimeters. This is what I have my laser machine dialed into, the distance from the nozzle to the material that I want to work on. So a neat little trick, a nice way to dial your machine in and set up the focus distance for your intended purpose. There you go. Now you have a fully calibrated machine ready to burn out some projects. If you have some suggestions for additional steps for calibration, leave them in the description below so that I and others who read those comments can benefit as well. The idea here is for all of us to benefit from a fully calibrated machine and make some money. If you've done your research and you're ready to pull a trigger on a machine like this, I've got affiliate links in the description, as well as discounts from Monport to save you some money. So if you'd like to support the channel, I really appreciate that. Otherwise, if you're interested in a review, I have one coming. At this point, I just haven't had enough time with this laser to give a solid recommendation. From the short amount of time that I've used it and the small projects that I have used it for, I am pretty impressed. 130 watts is much more than I thought it was. That's it for this video though. Thank you guys for hanging out and setting this baby up. I'll see you next time.